to Cinema Bytes on CCP TV, the Emmy-nominated educational channel of the Community College of Philadelphia. I'm your host, Dr. Amy Lewis. I'm an assistant professor of English who teaches film studies here at the college. Cinema Bytes reviews issues and topics within classic and contemporary films. But in today's episode, we're going to take a break from our film review format and interview one of Philadelphia's most beloved local personalities, Ed Cunningham. You most likely recognize Ed's face and voice from our local PBS station, WHYY. Ed has been a driving force at PBS for over 40 years now, prompting him to be dubbed the voice of WHYY. He's served as an on-air personality, a pledge drive fundraiser, a documentary producer, and a producer of some of the station's most popular pieces, including South Philadelphia Italian Style, A Walk Up Broad Street, Philly's favorite kids show hosts, and things that aren't there anymore. After his extensive career in broadcasting and journalism, Ed has come to know a thing or two about popular entertainment. And today he's going to share his expertise with us. So let's get started. Ed, thank you so much for coming on the show today and joining us.
My pleasure, Amy.
Oh, thank you. I know you actually had to rush over here from WHYY to be with us, and we really appreciate it. And I thought I'd ask you a few questions and tap into that wealth of knowledge that you have about a genre that is very niche, but I know you're a very passionate fan of, which is science fiction.
That's right. Yes.
And I have to be completely honest with you and say that I myself am not really a fan of science fiction, namely because I don't know that I've actually given it much of a chance. It's just a genre that's never particularly grabbed me. And so what I want to know from you is, what am I missing? Why has it not connected with me, and what makes it so great?
Well, I think that sometimes science fiction can be fairly and sometimes unfairly pigeonholed as bug-eyed monsters from beneath the sea attacking people in their homes and that sort of thing. And, you know, that works perfectly well for Saturday morning matinees, which was a staple of my childhood. Yeah. I saw plenty of bug-eyed monsters when I was a kid, too. But in addition to all of that, there was always sprinkled in amongst that some very intelligent films that had some intriguing things to say about, well, let's say, what society is now, what it might be in the future, what would it be like to behold alien beings for the first time. Another way of looking at it is, to me, I was thinking about this when I was coming over, and it seems to me that as Westerns, let's say 100 years ago, let us say, were the great frontier which really ignited people's imaginations and some unknown land that people wanted to explore and conquer. Now that frontier is not there anymore. I mean, it's all Los Angeles now, you know. Mm-hmm. But in its place, and together with that fact and the fact that scientific discoveries have meant so much to us in these last 100 years, it seems to be, as Captain Kirk used to say, space is the final frontier. And so and I've always had a great taste for things that are transcendental, if I may say. That sounds a little heavy, but to let my imagination soar, sometimes literally, and just to feel enthralled with something that is as far from my daily existence as it can be, is something that's always had a great deal of fascination and appeal for me. So I think that science fiction at its best does fulfill that need, certainly for me, and you know, for many other people too, for transcendence and to be enthralled about what may be out there in the great beyond.
All right, so sort of looking beyond the confines of our current world? I
think so. I mean, it's the opposite of the soap opera, I suppose, I would say, in which our domestic arrangements are the source of the drama. I want to go much further out and beyond than that.
Okay, I can certainly see the appeal of that.
Yeah, well, I'm starting you on your way. So
yeah, right. You're softening me. I like this. So now, you know, now that you have me sort of on the precipice here,
right.
What would you say are, you know, your top 3 or 4, you know, films that might convert even the greatest naysayer?
Well, before I get to that, I want to go back to my kidhood again, which was
Okay.
such an important part of it, and I will get to that. But one of my happy memories of childhood is, I don't know if they have them anymore, maybe you know, the bookmobile from the Free Library of Philadelphia.
I don't know if they still have them for today's youth, but they did
Yes.
still have them in my day.
I see. Well, they certainly had them in my day, and I'm talking, oh boy, back in the 1950s now. So they had a jalopy, I guess, a bookmobile that came by to the school, I don't know, guess once a week or something like that. And I can just remember a friend of mine and I in school, Eddie Fitzgerald, would love to go to this bookmobile, and sure enough, I can remember picking out some science fiction books. So I don't know, 10, 11, something like that.
Wow.
And I will say that is a wonderful service that the Free Library performed to bring books to people who may not have had the opportunity to, I don't know, go to a local branch or the central branch, but they came right to the school, and we got books, and we, rented them out for a week or two, and that is how I started reading science fiction, and that is how I started learning about people like Ray Bradbury, who was one of my first great science fiction authors, also Isaac Asimov, of course. And so before I talk about the science fiction films that have appealed to me, I guess I'd have to say that, again, aside from the bug-eyed monsters that I went to see every Saturday, I learned early that in books, anyway, there was some wonderful science fiction literature, and I thank the bookmobile for that.
That's great.
So, all right, so now that's a long and roundabout way of answering the question you actually asked me, which is, name some of what I would say are the most influential science fiction films and I must tell you, I'm not a film critic. I don't claim to be that, but I am a fan of the genre. So it got me to thinking a little bit about some films that have gone on throughout the years that have played an important role in advancing that art form, I think, through cinema. And so for the first one, and we all know that whomever you ask this question to is going to give you a different list from mine.
Of course.
But here's mine. Starts with Metropolis from the 1920s, the great Fritz Lang film about life in kind of a dystopian, ultra-capitalist, ultra-urban future in which the rich of society, if you'll say the 1% as we do these days, lived up above in these beautiful areas, whereas the poor sluggards were working down below to keep all of these wonderful machines going. It was a silent film from the 1920s, and number one, Fritz Lang was a brilliant filmmaker and just conjured up these magnificent images, and it was just an enthralling thing to see. But it's interesting in that it addressed an issue that was starting to come to the fore as capitalism took hold of our society and really governed the way we do our economic business, and that is the matter of the 1% versus the 99%. The people who do all the work and the small minority who benefit from all of that work. And it did it in the most amazing science fiction sort of way. It was kind of a futuristic look at society, but one in which people could recognize elements of the society they were living in. So I have to think that for that reason, that was one of the first great influential science fiction films. So do you want me to keep on listing
Absolutely.
I managed to get it down to 4,
Okay.
which is not easy, I will tell you.
Well, that speaks of your passion, though. I like that.
Well,
It's like
okay, fair
choosing
enough.
between your children, right?
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's right. And it's tough to get it down to 4, but I came up with an arbitrary 4.
Okay.
Number 2, we go into the 1950s, which was certainly a halcyon time for science fiction motion pictures. And again, getting back to what we were saying earlier, there were a lot of bug-eyed monsters running around killing teenagers, for reasons unknown. And sometimes you don't mind.
Right.
You can imagine why a monster would want to kill a teenager. But anyway, getting into other things, aside from that, as I said, there were some good ones, and I saw them. And one of the ones from that time, of course, was The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Okay.
And I don't know, I'm going to say that's 53 or 54 or something like that. And if you don't know the story, I'll just condense it very quickly, in which an alien visitor comes to Earth. And he's not a monster. He's actually Michael Rennie, who is a very fine English actor, and comes to Earth in the company of a robot called Gort. And his mission to Earth is to warn us, because the other societies out there in the universe have been observing what human beings have been doing to each other, and it worries them very much. Remember, this was the time when the H-bomb first came about, and people were worried about nuclear holocaust. And here was a film that addressed that, with some very exciting science fiction themes, some nice violent themes, including involving Gort the robot, but also with some wonderful human interaction with the alien, as played by Michael Rennie. And again, the point was made. I think it's one of the first instances, and we can always argue that, one of the first instances, and here, of a message science fiction film that we have something we want to say to society, and we're going to say it in this format. So, and then there have been others like that since then, but I think of that as being one of the first, and what a wonderfully done film it was. It just keeps your interest from first to last.
Yeah.
Now, there was another one from the 1950s, which I think also, in a somewhat different way, spoke to how influential science fiction can be in film, and that is Forbidden Planet. This was one of the first efforts by a motion picture studio. I'm embarrassed that I can't remember which studio we're talking about, but to really spend some money on things like set design and special effects and that sort of thing.
Right.
Because the idea was that visitors from Earth went to this alien planet to look up the remains of a pioneering group that had gone there some years before and had never been heard from again, you see. And so they go to this planet, and the wonderful thing about it is, and I think for me what makes it so influential, is that this was a literate film. I mentioned that money was spent on special effects. It looked beautiful, and it looked believable. You could really believe you were on an alien planet with the set design. But the fact is that Forbidden Planet was based on none other than one of Shakespeare's great plays, The Tempest. So it used themes from The Tempest, one of the great literature pieces of all time.
Shakespeare was a pretty good writer.
Yeah, you may have heard of Shakespeare. He did some good things in his day. So they readapted this to a science fiction future, and it was scary, but it was also intelligent. And plenty of Shakespeare's plays were scary too. But this is a wonderful film that, in addition, by the way, to being based on The Tempest, also had strong themes of Freudian psychology, which at the time, when I was a kid, was the thing. I mean, this is the way we understood our secret natures and our secret desires. I don't know if Freudian psychology is quite today what it was in those days, but it was then. Well, this was one long psychiatric couch session on another planet with Freudian psychology. So I think in that sense, again, it was a pathfinder showing how literate science fiction could be.
Now, just out of curiosity, did you pick up on those Freudian undertones at the time that you were watching?
Well, that's a very good question.
Okay.
I mean, I was a kid, so I mean, you bring up a good point. I think that it was done broadly enough, or even a young person could see what was going on. That there's things going on inside our brains that are every bit as monstrous as those bug-eyed people we were talking about earlier. You see, so it was wonderful in that way, and I just whenever it's on, I love to see it. And so I've only been able to boil it down to 4. I could go on, but I'm going to force myself to arrive at a 4th and leave it at that.
Okay.
And that is, I think, pretty obvious to anyone, and that is, of course, 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Okay.
And to this day, Amy, I can't tell you what the plot was. I've only seen it about a dozen times, and I have a devil of a time trying to unravel this plot. It is so mind-bending that it's very difficult. I mean, you may have to be a Freudian psychologist to understand it. But the thing about it is, the people say, well, if you can't understand it, why do you like it? I don't know, and I don't care. It was such an enthralling experience. I keep coming back to the words enthralling and transcendence.
Yeah.
And this was a very transcendent film which sent you out into realms of time and space and extra dimensions that just completely blow your mind. So you may not understand it, but you don't care, because it is one of the truly supreme filmmaking experiences of all time. So I won't bore you with any more. I could get into some others that I think might deserve consideration, but when I was forced to bring it down to 4, those are the 4.
Well, and I think I like some of the things that you're pointing out here, because I think sometimes when we don't understand something, we sort of assume there's a flaw either within us or within the piece. And so it's kind of refreshing to hear you say, hey, if you don't understand that, it's okay. It doesn't mean,
Right.
something's wrong with you. Go along with the journey.
That's right. That's exactly right. And you make a good point. I remember reading something when I was in college about the difference between Eastern philosophies and Western philosophies, and how the Eastern philosophies sometimes marvel at what they called in this article logic-worshipping Westerners, you see. And logic is wonderful. Mr. Spock, of course, believes in that to the nth degree. But I think as you go along in life, you realize logic isn't everything. Mm-hmm. That sense of wonder, and again, transcendence, there I go back. I'm not being paid by the word on that, but it just keeps coming up. There's something else, and certainly in my case, 2001 fulfilled that non-logical, if you will, sense of there's something special going on out there.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too, because at the same time you're talking about this transcendence and this kind of otherworldliness.
Yes.
There seem to be some real truths sewn in about the real world in which we live.
Oh,
at
absolutely.
the same time, sort
As
of
I
metaphorically.
say, in the case of Metropolis, here was wrestling with themes of capitalism and social justice, you see. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with Forbidden Planet. What are we doing to ourselves on this planet? Are we going to wind up killing ourselves and polluting the universe? And so it goes on like that. That's why I think films like that are influential in that way. You can sit back and enjoy a film and maybe forget about it.
Yeah.
And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And plenty of science fiction films are that way. But those few really speak to me about discussing perhaps bigger things than just what you're seeing on the screen.
Yeah, they resonate.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, if you then could narrow it down, so I've made you pick between all of your children
Yes.
and narrow it down to 4, and I'm going to be even more specific now and ask you if you could name one scene that could sort of encapsulate the spirit or the beauty of science fiction. What would you say that is?
Well, I guess I'll go back to my Freudian psychology on this one with regard to Forbidden Planet. And to me, one of the great moments that essentially was nonverbal. Mm-hmm. Just to capsulize this, if you've seen the film, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen it, maybe you can have a little scene to show them what I mean.
Of course.
The whole idea was that as we visit Dr. Morbius' planet, which he is lording over, which had a terrible catastrophe some years back, you will see that he lords over this planet, and he has a robot helper called Robbie the robot. Very cute. But it was one of the first depictions of robots, too, I guess you could say, aside from Metropolis, of course.
And alliterative.
And yes, that's right. And the whole idea was that Robbie the robot had a prime directive that governed everything he did. He was not allowed to harm a human being. Do no harm to a human being. And they had a scene earlier on in which they hand him a blaster and say, shoot that man. And he tries to pull the trigger, and he kind of all short circuits, and you see all these electrical charges going up and down. He's totally frozen. He can't do it. He's torn between obeying an order and his prime directive not to kill a human being. Well, all of this is a perfect foreshadowing to the climax of the film, in which Dr. Morbius, who we know at this point has a very terrible secret and has been trying to hold this in check, there is an unseen monster coming in to kill Dr. Morbius, all the visitors to the planet who were there, who came in to find out what was going on. And he said, Robbie, Dr. Morbius said this, kill the monster, go out there and kill it. And as he says that to Robbie, the short circuit happens again. And we know, if you've been watching the film and following it, exactly what is meant by that. It's a wonderful moment in which cinematic tricks tell you, oh, I get what's going on. To me, the first time I saw it, I was knocked over. Couldn't believe it. Beautifully done. Freudian psychology portrayed to the best.
That's fantastic. So it sounds like there's a good deal of inference, taking place within that film.
Yes, and you don't always have to lay it right out there. Let the film tell the story. Let the setup to what you're seeing now tell the story about what's going on. And it was just a very great moment. So that is one aha moment that I always remember from that particular film.
It's good. It seems almost interactive in a way, where you're asking for the audience to participate, to bring with them some of the story to kind of complete the picture.
Absolutely, and we've all struggled with what we know now to be, or what was called then certainly the id, the ego, and the superego, and all of these roiling emotions and needs inside our brains that sometimes govern what we do and can sometimes be very destructive. So I think I might have given you a little hint right there, didn't I?
Absolutely.
But that's okay.
Spoiler alert, I don't mind.
But you should try it.
You are winning me over with every question, and it's interesting because you've anticipated a lot of my questions in that there is this reputation of sci-fi as just being bug-eyed monsters and something for kind of.
And there is some of that.
Of course,
sure.
yeah, but it seems to be that there's maybe a little more to these bug-eyed monsters, if not a metaphorical sort of delivery method than a transcendental. To use the word one more time.
Well, I know it's going to be said again, folks, so get used to it. But yeah, I mean, Ellie and I think she told you about this just recently, saw one of the more updated science fiction films. It was very, very good one called The Arrival, about the first contact of an alien species coming to Earth to visit us and to try to give us a message. And there were, well, they weren't bug-eyed, but this is not the kind of creature you would want to see visiting you in your home at night. They're little, they look like giant squid, I guess you could say. So they're a little odd looking, but nothing the slightest bit scary about it, because that's not the way it was approached. These are different beings with a different frame of reference and some very, very mind-bending revelations about the nature of space and time in the film. But yeah, just because, and so it reminds you, I just actually am thinking of this as out loud as I'm speaking to you, that there's another little lesson to be learned in a film like that particularly, in which just because you're different doesn't mean you're bad. Just because you don't look like me doesn't mean you're a bad person. Just because you do things differently doesn't mean you're a bad person. So that's a little obvious, I guess, but we see the point that there's nothing wrong with being different. It's just the part of the fascinating tapestry of life,
Well, and it seems like it's a message that we somehow still haven't quite
we
grasped
certainly
as a
have
society.
not. So we need to be reminded.
Exactly.
No
so
question.
sci-fi
Absolutely.
can keep hammering away at that.
Yeah, well, we like to think that we have, but sometimes we see things happen which show us we still have a long way to go.
Yeah. Well, I guess my last question for you then would be, where do you see this genre going then? Do you see it delivering more of the same? Do you see it evolving with the times, or doing something sort of in between?
Well, I always think that motion pictures, certainly, and you could make a case for certainly television and perhaps even written literature, that often they reflect the times we live in. Now, we like to think that they influence it, and I think they do their part. but they're always a product of their times and some of the concerns that we have as human beings. And those concerns and those issues are taken up, in this case, on the motion picture screen. So I think as our attitudes towards things and our questions about life and the great beyond and all sorts of heavy stuff like that continue to be asked, there will be films, in my case in the science fiction genre, that will continue to ask those questions, no question about it. I don't think there are as many bug-eyed monster movies as there used to be, at least not that I'm aware of. There are some cheapies out there, but that's true of all genres. So I do think that we're getting into a true golden era, if I will, of science fiction filmdom, in which people are taking some serious themes and developing them in serious ways that you can think, wow, I never thought of things like that before. Pretty cool. And again, I'll go back to my word, transcendence. There's always that element that has to be there too, because you can learn good lessons from a number of different genres of film. But transcendence seems to me to be a special virtue of the science fiction film.
Wow.
So.
Well, I think you are a great representative of the science fiction film. I think you've done a great job of converting a critic, and my husband will be only too delighted about this because he always wants to watch science fiction films. And
Well,
I say,
he should.
Maybe another time, you know. So I think maybe I might just sit down and watch some with him after this.
I think we have a convert here. I'll tell
yeah,
you what,
there we
that's
go.
wonderful.
I've seen the light, right? Well, I want to thank you so much. This has really been very enlightening, and I've learned a lot about science fiction. I see now it is more than just the bug-eyed monsters and bad special effects.
We've given a bad name to bug-eyed monsters.
Exactly.
Got some pretty bad press here today.
You know, and the odd bug-eyed monster with a message, why not, right? Well, if our viewers are more interested to hear about science fiction films, do you have any suggestions as to where they could go to learn more?
About science fiction films, go see one, is what I would say. That's the simple, easiest answer. But there are any number of film criticism books. I'll tell you, aside from science fiction films, I still will say, after having gone on like this for a half hour, I still love to read science fiction the most. So I say, if you really want to get it, find some good science fiction authors. Do Isaac Asimov, do Ray Bradbury. You can't go wrong.
Oh, fantastic.
That's a good start.
Great. So a great way to kind of cultivate the taste.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Absolutely.
Well, I thank you so much again. We really appreciate you being here.
My pleasure.
And that's all the time we have for today. You've been watching Cinema Bytes on CCP TV, the twice Emmy-nominated educational channel of the Community College of Philadelphia. Thank you for joining us, and keep an eye out for the next big film debate. See you next time.